need to start encouraging others to show up. This is kind of discouraging. I only have this many here tonight, so I'll try to get on my toes and try to see if I can get a few others to come next time around. Not that you're not worth it. You all are worth the time that I spend preparing this for anyway. Nehemiah chapter 3. Here we go. Let's look at the first couple of verses. Starts out, then Eliashib, the high priest, arose with his brothers the priests and built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and hung its doors. They consecrated the wall to the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hananel. Next to him, the men of Jericho built, and next to them, Zachar, the son of Imri. So, look at these couple of verses pretty carefully here and note a few of the things that it talks about. First of all, it talks about the sheep gate, talks about the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hananel. It talks about the men of Jericho and the family of Zachar and Eliashib and his brothers, the priests. Okay, now let's look at this is a depiction of the walls of Jerusalem during the time of Nehemiah. Now, if you remember last week, Nehemiah started his survey of the walls here at the Valley Gate and went around this way, okay? But now, as he describes the work that's being done to rebuild the walls and the gates, he starts here at the sheep gate. And he too goes in a counterclockwise direction. Again, he talks about the sheep gate, the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hananel, okay? So this is where we are, in the northeast is where we start. He talks about how the sheep gate was the first gate to be repaired, and then here the people he listed there, the men from Jericho and from the family of Zachar and stuff, that this is what they worked on, was this part of the wall. Okay, now let's look at it. Many who study Scripture find Nehemiah 3 to be very inspirational. Now, if you're just reading the Bible and you get to Nehemiah 3 and you read it, you're not going to be very inspired by it, because it's just a bunch of names. Just a bunch of names. It talks about parts of the city, and I've never been to Jerusalem. Anybody here been to Jerusalem? Some of these things, remnants of some of these things still exist, but not that much. But there's still some ancient remains of some of these things, ruins that remain. But anyway, but to me, you have to look to find inspiration. But we're going to do that, okay? We're going to find some inspirational things. The theme of this whole chapter is build. Build. I don't know how many times it's in there, but that's the whole point of chapter 3, is just the building of these walls, okay? Now, it also, in nearly every little section of Scripture in this chapter, it starts by talking about the gates. This person was in charge of the gates. And this first couple of verses, we find out that the high priest was the one who was, and the other priests were the ones who were, Eliashib and the other high priests were the ones who built the sheep gate. And then, so what these verses do is that they reference the gates, and the reason why is because the gates are critical points of entry and exit for a city. They're also very vulnerable, because that's the most likely place for an enemy to attack. So gates had to be very secure. They had to be very strong, and they had to be maintained, and they had to be guarded. And a city like Jerusalem, and like most of these, we're going to have a lot of gates, and we find that true. So we see the gates, and that's why I said here, therefore, the work started at each gate and then worked outward from there. And that's what we see in these first couple of verses. The high priest started with the sheep gate, and then from there, the other people began working in a western direction, taking care of the walls around the two towers. The sheep gate is called the sheep gate because it's the place where shepherds brought their flocks to sell them. Okay. Now, most of these gates have names, and it's not that hard to figure out why they're called what they're called. Now it's pretty easy to figure out why it got the name Sheep Gate, because that's where you took your sheep to enter the city when you were going to sell them. That was what the gate was designated for. And there's really some wisdom in that to do certain things and to do certain functions, there were gates designated for whatever those purposes and functions were. Otherwise, if you didn't have it that way, there'd be people entering. Well, as an example, if you've ever been to a football game, usually your ticket will tell you what gates you should go through, to get to your section that you can sit. Because if they only had one gate, then everybody was trying to get through there, there'd be mayhem. So that makes it easier, like at a Razorback game and Fayetteville, if 70,000 people show up and all of them trying to go through one or two gates. It's a mess. So you can look on your ticket and say, well, this says I should go through gate 6. And that's the closest gate to your seat. So it makes sense. And that's kind of the way I look at all these different gates. Yeah, they all had different names. The names were associated with their functions, and those functions made it more orderly to people coming and going from the city. Okay, the first worker mission is Elisha. I think what we learn in these, it doesn't go on and on about Elisha, because these are the words of Nehemiah, giving these people credit for working to rebuild the walls and the gates. But obviously, he was a devoted and godly leader. And I think we can make that conclusion because it says his brothers, the priest, also joined him in this. Now, so that leads me to my first point about inspiration. And my first point about inspiration is Elisha, though he was the high priest, said, I'll help. I'll do what I can. And that's inspirational. When you see people who roll up their sleeves and do something. And so I think it says something about Elisha and the priests who served under him, that he was able to say, okay, guys, let's take the sheep gate. Or maybe, I'd like to think that maybe Nehemiah was such a great organizer that he may have said to those people who arrived for the first meeting of what do we do now, said, Elisha, you take the sheep gate. And Elisha said, I'm on it. And he got his priests, and they were the ones who were responsible for it. So that's one point of inspiration, that people who had some standing in the Jewish community were willing to roll up their sleeves and do something. Okay. The word consecrated, can somebody define it? I have done it there. I said it's to make something, or to make or declare something as sacred. We kind of use, how do we define, those of us in Sunday school classes, how do we define consecrate or consecrated?
We use the word sanctified sometimes.
Sanctified, and what does that mean?
Set apart.
Set apart, yeah, set apart. But I think that's an awfully general term. I think when it talks about consecration here, it is saying that they are, what they're doing as a tribute to God. We are rebuilding these gates, we are rebuilding these walls, and we're doing it for our God. Okay, and that's why. Go ahead.
Well, in Scripture, though, I mean that's it's what it means.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Scripture.
Yeah.
Because even though the word, the strict definition is set apart, usually in Scripture means set apart for
God's purpose.
For God's
and
purpose.
usage. Yeah, yeah.
Another translation I'm looking at says dedicated.
Okay, dedicated.
Which would have the same idea.
But
dedicated to God, of course.
Right. But I think it's interesting that the first verse starts out by saying they consecrated it and hung its doors.
Mine says because of the sacrifice of the sheep.
Yeah, because of its sacrifice of the sheep.
It says it's named because sheep was brought through it to sacrifice.
Well, I'm sure sheep were brought through there to sacrifice. But it also, from what I've read and I've studied, shepherds who brought sheep to market prepared the refuse gate. He built it and hung his doors with its bolts and his bars. All right. What do you think the refuse gate of the dung gate was for?
Take out the trash.
Take out the trash. Where our house sits used to be in very close proximity to the city dump. And it appears that over time, people didn't quite make it to the dump, and they just dumped where our property is. And it's not hard to believe that, because out in our backyard after a rain and stuff like that, you'll look down and see something shiny. It's a piece of glass that's worked its way to the surface. We'll find big pieces of bottles and parts of tin cans, and even found the license plate out there one time, you know. And fortunately, we don't have to deal with the odors and the flies and things of that nature. How many of you have made a trip to the Clarksville Sanitary Landfill? Now, how many of you would like to live on that road? No. So, I'm not so sure that a lot of people wanted to be around the refuse gate, because that's where you took the garbage and the trash and all the smelly stuff. I'm not so sure that the guy who was given the task of fixing the refuse gate was particularly happy about that. But Malchijah was willing to do it. He built the refuse gate, and he was an official of a district in Jerusalem. So he was willing to do something that was a little bit beneath his dignity. And that's inspiring. Next. So now we've moved down from the valley gate. We're down here to the refuse gate. Okay, down here, and it obviously is on the very extreme part of the wall, you know. Now let's see what the next chapter. Oh, anyway. He didn't. Yeah, I just said didn't consider himself too important, so he brought stuff to me. Okay, now look at the next few verses. Shalom, the son of Hosea, the official of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it. This is the only time it talks about covering it. Of all the gates, this is the only place it says covered it. And I don't know what it means by covering it. I don't know what that means. The fountain gate, maybe because it might, because of its close approximation to fountains that were going to maybe cause it to have an additional amount of moisture. It was covered differently than other gates. That's the only thing I can think of. Anyway, he hung its doors and its bolts and bars, and the wall of the pool of Shelah at the king's garden, as far as the steps that descend from the city of David. After him, Nehemiah, this is a different Nehemiah. After him, Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, official of the half district of Beth Zur, made repairs as far as the point opposite the tombs of David, and as far as the artificial pool and the house of the mighty men. After him, an artificial pool. That's an interesting term. And apparently, what that means to me is that there were lots of pools in this area, and I'm going to show you on the map where these pools were located. There were lots of pools, but most of them were natural pools. They were either springs or just little small bodies of water. But this one was a man-made pool. a pool where they probably set in rocks and tried to water seal it, and then kept water in it, maybe for bathing purposes or something of that nature. That's not that important. I just thought it was interesting language. And the house of the mighty men. Apparently, we know about mighty men from David's time. David had a group of mighty men who were special warriors, and they were treated specially. When I was in college, I was on the track team, and all of us who were athletes were allowed to eat at the training table. And the training table was where you got more food than everybody else. You had a better selection. I don't know why they felt like track runners needed more food, but there was something special about being an athlete and being entitled to more than average really. But that's kind of the way these mighty men were treated. I think obviously they were given a place to live, and they were also provided with what they needed to keep up their strength, obviously, so they could continue to work in the king's service. After him, the Levites carried out repairs under Rehum, the son of Bani. Next to him, Hashabiah, the official of half the district of Keilah, carried out the repairs for his district. So here now we've moved from the refuse gate to the fountain gate. And this is the area where a lot of the pools are located. I know that from looking at other maps of the walls of Jerusalem. This was an area, and it may have been because it was in a valley or something, but this was just a place where there were many, many pools and other fountains and things of this nature. I think that's why this is called the fountain gate. Let's keep going. After him, their brothers carried out repairs under Babai, the son of Henadad, official of the other half of the district of Keilah. Next to him, Ezer, the son of Jeshua, the official of Mizpah, repaired another section in front of the ascent of the armory at the angle. We're going to see, I put this word in all capitals because we're going to see this. I don't know what this is, but I think we can figure out what it is. We'll see a reference to the angle, and we'll see a reference to the corner, okay? But this just says, repaired another section in front of the ascent of the armory at the angle. After him, Barak, the son of Zabai, zealously repaired another section from the angle to the doorway of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. And after him, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired another section from the doorway of Eliashib's house, even as far as the end of his house. And after him, the priests, the men of the valley, carried out repairs. After them, Benjamin and Hashab carried out repairs in front of their house. And after them, Azariah, the son of Maaseiah, son of Hananiah, carried out repairs beside his house. After him, Benui, the son of Henadad, repaired another section from the house of Azariah as far as the angle and as far as the corner. Palal, the son of Uzziah, made repairs on the front of the angle and the tower projecting from the upper house of the king, which is by the court of the guard. After him, Pedadiah, the son of Parash, made repairs. So if we look at the map here, they're moving up this way. This is where the towers, talked about the towers, the great projecting towers and this kind of thing. When we get up into this area, this area, Ophel and right around, this is where the palace of the king had once existed. Now, there's not a king anymore. The Jews don't have a king anymore. They haven't had a king since the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom and carried them away into captivity. Now they've come back from that captivity. They're no longer allowed to have a king. Okay? The king is the king of Persia. So there's really not much mention here in this diagram of Nehemiah's Jerusalem of any kind of palace or anything, because there is no king. But it's still that area that people once knew as the area where David was buried and where his mighty men were housed and things like that. That's why it makes those references in these verses. Okay. Moving along, the next two verses say, the temple, and I wanted to point out one thing too. If you notice the number of times it mentions an official, nearly every one of these segments talks about he was an official of half the district of here and half the district of that. And so we see a lot of people in important positions who are taking part in this. Okay. Now, the next two verses, the temple service living in Ophel, and we saw Ophel right there. This is that territory. Okay. And here's another territory here called Zion. And sometimes Jerusalem itself in its totality is called Zion. But this area is called Zion. This area is called Ophel. Okay. And it says here that the temple servants living in Ophel. Okay. The temple servants, that would be Levites and things of this nature. But it could have been Gibeonites and things too. Made repairs as far as the front of the water gate toward the east and the projecting tower. And after them, here are the Tekoites again now. Like I said, they worked way up north for a while, but now we see them coming down here to the east. They repaired another section in front of the great projecting tower and as far as the wall of Ophel. So here's what we're talking about here. This territory right in here where they're working now. Now, moving on. Above the horse gate, okay, there's the horse gate right here. Above the horse gate, the priests carried out repairs, each in front of his house. And after them, Zadok, the son of Immer, carried out repairs in front of his house. And after him, Shemaiah, the son of Shechaniah, the keeper of East Gate, carried out repairs. And after him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanan, the sixth son of Zadok, repaired another section. After him, Meshulam, the son of Berechiah, carried out repairs in front of his own quarters. Here we see other references to people working on parts of the wall that were closest to their house. We talked about the horse gate. We talked about the keeper of the east gate being charged with taking care of repairing his gate. And now we move on to the last two verses. Now, talking about the corner and things like, the only thing I can figure out is when it talks about these places like the corner and what was the angle and things like that. To me, it is probably a reference to these parts of the wall where you have a really odd angle. Like here's an angle, you know, and but that's again, it doesn't go into an explanation of that. It just talks about an angle and a corner, and I view this as a possible corner right here, and this as a corner, and this perhaps as an angle and that kind of thing. So and I think what it's saying is they're just places in the wall where one wall is coming for this direction and the same wall is coming from a different direction, and it creates an angle or a corner there in that situation. So it appears that some workers were charged with, you know, taking care of this part of the wall until they'll reach this point at a corner or an angle, and then another group is supposed to take the wall from there to a little different position. Now, last two verses after him, Malchijah, again, here's another Malchijah, not the same one that he had before and wife. After him, Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, we see another goldsmithing, carried out repairs as far as the house of the temple servants and of the merchants in front of the inspection gate. And this is probably the inspection gate. It had lots of names. Here it's called the muster gate. It's called the evaluation gate. It's called the assimilation gate. But here in the scriptures, it refers to it as the inspection gate. And as far as the upper room of the corner, between the upper room and the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants carried out repairs. So now we've made it all the way around from the inspection gate or the muster gate back to the sheep gate where we started. Okay. Now, so it is kind of a boring chapter to read all these names, and you don't really know who most of them are and this kind of thing. But I think it's really interesting that they're named by Nehemiah. Okay, now, observations. One thing we know, a wall has to be continuous and a wall has to be uninterrupted. For it to be a decent wall, and that's part of the problem with the wall of our southern border. It is not continuous, and it has interruptions, and therefore it's permeable. People can cross it and get through it pretty easily. But a good wall is going to be continuous. It's going to be uninterrupted. So each small space was important. So everyone's role was equally important. Everyone who worked on a certain part of this wall was a part of the whole. And no one part was more important than the other. Because if there's one part of the wall that is unprotected and insecure, then the whole wall becomes insecure and the whole city becomes vulnerable. So I think that's why we see Nehemiah here go to extremes to tell us about each section of the wall and who was involved in that, because he doesn't ever say this was the most important part, or this was the most structurally sound part. Every part was important. And another thing I think that's inspirational here is that the workers were united. There's no indication that they bickered, because this was done in 52 days. 52 days. And for what they had to do, that's really remarkable. And it shows that they worked together quite well. And that they didn't mind taking orders, and they didn't mind pitching in to help. Okay. Now, Nehemiah's leadership. This is the last thing we're going to talk about. I just listed some things here that I thought were evident about Nehemiah and his leadership capabilities. First of all, he made each man accountable for his work. One of the things that you learn if you do any seminars in leadership or being a leader or this kind of, it tells you a good leader will relegate. A good leader will say, I'm counting on you to do this. I'm counting on you to do this. I'm counting on you to do this. You know, and have you ever heard of people who are criticized because they micromanage? That's the kind of leader who wants to be involved in every single decision that's made. And I don't think Nehemiah was quite like that. He gave people the liberty, but made sure that they understood how important their tasks were. And he noted who did and didn't work. He could have. He was pretty kind. He could have named the nobility of the Tekoites by name if he wanted to, but he just talked about them generally. But he didn't talk of others too generally. He used a lot of names, even down to the guy's daughters who were willing to work. And he organized the work for maximum efficiency. You have to be organized. Yeah, you have to be organized. And to me, it's really interesting that instead of everybody putting their attention here at the sheep gate and then moving over here to the next gate, it didn't work like that. And everybody was doing something at the same time with the same goal in mind. And he knew where to start and he knew how to start. Okay? And he was able to blend people of different abilities and backgrounds. And that's a sign of a good leader. And he allowed people to try new things. He allowed people to try new things. I don't care if you're just a goldsmith. I don't care if you're a perfumer. You can do this. If you can do that, you can do this. You know, that's important. He allowed people to focus on their own houses first, because that gives them a vested interest. That's pretty smart, pretty good leadership. And he didn't disqualify people because of past sin. Akijah, all right. You're one of us again. Come on, get involved in this. All right. And time's up. Yeah.